I will start by introducing our panelists, and then we'll go ahead and dive in with some questions. So as far as questions go, we'll hold off on most questions until the end, but feel free to drop questions in the chat along the way, especially if there's a related point that you want to follow up on before we move on to another question for the panelists. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll hopefully get to some of the questions that you guys have for the panelists. So with that, I will hand it off to the panelists. If you could just introduce yourself, your name, and just really briefly what position you're in.
Sure, I guess I'll go first. Hi, everyone. My name is Myra. I just graduated actually last year with my bachelor's in data science. And currently I'm working as a data scientist at Thermo Fisher Scientific. So more specifically, I'm in the life sciences and laboratory products group. So we get to work on a lot of cool data science problems across the board. So yeah, thank you all for having me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Myra.
I guess I'll go. Hey everyone, I'm Eric. I'm a PhD student in bioinformatics, and I'm in the Yo Lab. I actually graduated in 2014 in computer science, and I worked for 5 years before starting a PhD. So I was working as a software engineer at a startup for 3 years, and then I worked for 2 years as a research associate in a cancer bioinformatics lab at Dana-Farber. So yeah, and now I'm here. Anyways, nice to meet you guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate. I did my master's at UCSD as part of the BS-MS program, and currently working at Singular Genomics as a research associate too.
Thanks, Kate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Perfacci. I just defended my PhD in December. So newly minted PhD from the Neurosciences program here at UC San Diego. I'm currently doing a short postdoc in the lab that I did my PhD in, the Daneman lab. But then I will transition this fall to sort of my real full postdoc down the road at Scripps.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie.
And hi all, I'm Nicole. I was a PhD student at UCSD in neuroscience, where I got my master's in neuroscience as well, up until last year when I moved over to be the Bigelow Science Communication Fellow at UCSD Health. And you know, we'll get into it, but as of today, I am actually the Research Communications and Media Relations Manager there in the health sciences. Yeah.
Oh, well, awesome. Congrats, Nicole, and thanks for joining us. So thanks, everyone. I'm really excited about this group that we have. As you guys can see, we have a variety of individuals with different degrees who are on different positions right now. So I'm hoping that they can all provide some insight into why grad school, and hopefully you guys will find that helpful for your own decisions. So I'm hoping we can start off with the panelists telling us a little bit more detail into what their current position entails, and if they can speak to kind of a day in the life in their position, what work-life balance might look like, talk about maybe expectations. Feel free to pick and choose on those topics, but if you guys could tell us all a little bit more about your positions, that'd be great.
I can start. Yeah, so as a data scientist at Thermo Fisher, a little bit of background about the company. Thermo Fisher is considered one of the world leader in serving science. So basically, any type of instrument or product you would find in a wet lab, Thermo Fisher probably produces. So as part of the core data science team at Thermo Fisher, we get to work on a variety of different kinds of problems. So you might think of product recommendation, like for example, one of the product problems that we work on is we actually look at different research labs and we look at, you know, what are they doing? What are they researching? And then what kinds of products or workflows might they need in order to support their lab? So we get to, every single week is something different, which is what I like a lot about being a data scientist. You know, in terms of data like day in the life, I work pretty much 100% remote because most of my job is, you know, writing code, doing data analysis, all that fun stuff. So because I work fully remote, what's nice is that, I'm not expected, I'm not expected to be hands to keyboard 40 hours a week. It's more like finish your work by the deadline and you're good to go. So yeah, in terms of perks, it is your standard full-time job. So, you get compensated, there's benefits, and there's lots of room to grow. It's a very big company, and there's lots of awesome people to learn from as well.
Awesome. That was great. Thanks, Myra.
So I'm in the bioinformatics PhD program, as I said, and of course that means most of my work is computational. I'd say that one of the nice differences from the alternatives that I could be doing right now and what I tried by working at a startup is that I have gotten to explore some of the experimental side of biology and not just the data analytics side, which is one of the reasons I wanted to come to grad school, so I could understand the data I was working with better. But yeah, day in the life, it's hard to say what it normally is because I've only been doing my PhD during the pandemic. But yeah, it's pretty flexible in the sense I'm working on like multiple projects at once. I've been able to work from home a lot, and I think it's very dependent on your lab. I feel very lucky to be in a lab with a lot of very supportive teammates and a pretty reasonable boss. But I think that is probably the main factor that influences what your PhD looks like. And some people can have terrible experiences just if they don't have the right boss or the right projects or the right coworkers. So it's hard to say that any one person's PhD experience is representative of other people's, but it's good to keep in mind that it can be very bad or very good, depending on what you choose.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
Okay. So like I said, I'm working at a company called Singular Genomics. So we're a startup company that's developing a benchtop sequencing platform. So if you're really interested, you can go to our website because I don't want to say things I'm not allowed to, but which is pretty typical for working at a startup. But I personally work on our sequencing applications team, so developing new products. And a lot of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis is, of course, as a research associate, you would be working in the lab, performing experiments. And then depending on the company and how large your team is, you might also be more hands-on with the data analysis and making presentations to the company. So the team that I work on and the little sub-team in that is very small. So my day in the life is kind of a mix of do experiments and then work on presentations, talk about my data, analyze data. And I would say that for this particular company, there are a lot of perks. I think do your research into where you're applying when you are finding jobs in industry. I got this particular job through a referral, so it's really helpful to know what is the work-life balance. I work a lot, and then whether or not your particular company gives bonuses or what the vacation time is like and things like that. So at my current job, it's pretty good, but like I said, we are busy and being in the lab is challenging from a time perspective. So that's mostly what I have to say. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate.
So I am a postdoc, which if you aren't aware, after your PhD, you can do a postdoc, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to stay in academia and be a professor. It is the way to do that, but you can also do a postdoc and then do something else after. So that's kind of what a postdoc is. A postdoc is very, very similar to what you're doing as a PhD student. You get paid like a little bit more, but largely the day-to-day is very similar. So I will also echo what Eric said, that your experience is like very highly dependent on the lab that you are in. So I personally am like work in a wet lab, so I do not do a ton of computer stuff. I'm like planning experiments, working at the lab bench, a lot of the time. One thing that's really nice, I think it's a perk. It might be hard for some people about doing a PhD or a postdoc, is your schedule is really set by you. And so, I could work every day from like noon to 9, or, this morning I was in lab at 6 a.m. Tomorrow I probably won't go in until 11. And so you can kind of like work your schedule around things that are happening in your life, which is kind of nice. But it can also be a curse in that you don't know when to stop working. And so work-life balance is also kind of up to you. Yeah, I would say generally a lot of things are up to you, whereas kind of in undergrad, there's this path that you are, you're studying, you have classes and you're studying for those classes and doing those things. And in grad school or a postdoc, it's very much like you're setting your own schedule and goals and planning your own experiments. And so it's like a very different mindset, I would say.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Katie.
All right, and yeah, I am, again, a science communicator, a science writer for UCSD Health Sciences. So basically, my job is to tell the public about all of the cool science and, medicine that's happening on campus. So a lot of what I do is, produce a lot of different kinds of content. So some of that is press releases, which are basically, articles about a new research paper or a new project that's happening. That goes out to the public, but also to reporters who might want to build their own stories about it. I get to write a lot of my own feature stories, so those are more kind of like original journalism about different kind of science topics that we're working on. I write blog posts, I do podcast episodes, I do some video work, and then I also work with reporters for local and national media outlets to kind of help pitch them stories about work that's happening at UCSD. And I've worked with them to record TV segments and different stuff on campus. So all kinds of science communications. Yeah, a typical day involves some combination of all that stuff. So I'm usually reading original research manuscripts, so papers that come out of labs. I'm doing some research on the topic because I get to write about a lot of different kinds of science. So I'm always learning about different science while I do that. I do a lot of interviews. So I interview faculty members and different people that might be involved in a story. And then, of course, actually doing the writing. So a lot of it, yeah, is kind of what is necessary that day for some projects. But I would say overall, my schedule is very flexible, and yeah, my work-life balance is amazing. So yeah, I've had evenings and weekends to myself for the first time maybe ever, considering, yeah, up until this point, I had always been doing research and I was a PhD student up till last year. To clarify, I basically left my program to do this fellowship, to try this fellowship, and then I kind of loved things so much that I've continued so far. So yeah, basically, yeah, my work-life balance is great. If I'm at my desk at 5 p.m., my boss tells me to go home. So that's, yeah, been a new experience. I also work hybrid, so I have 2 days in the office and 3 days at home, which I really love, especially when you're like getting in that creative zone writing or interviewing. It's nice to do that in the privacy of my own home, but still have, the time to be social with coworkers during the day. And yeah, other perks, I'm definitely getting paid more than I was as a graduate student. It's, SciComm isn't the most lucrative compared to, data science or, consulting or some other alternative careers, but I will say I get paid in time, and I think time is, one of the most valuable things. So I definitely don't take that for granted either. But yeah, I've really enjoyed, getting to be a science writer this last year.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. I think that was really helpful to hear about your current positions and how different they all are from each other. So I think that was great. So my next question is, I was wondering if a few of you could speak to what your ultimate career goal is if you aren't currently in that position. So whether you're a student or if you're in a position right now and you ultimately want to get somewhere else, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
I mean, I'm still very early in my career, so I think my career goals are still being fleshed out as we speak. So I think right after college, I'm just kind of dipping my toes into biotech. That's the industry that I'm very interested in. So I guess in the future, I I guess I see myself as sort of a leader more so on the science side. I don't really think I'm a business savvy person, so I would love to be like a lead scientist or product owner, or maybe have my own startup or a biotech product in the future, I think.
Yeah, awesome. I don't know, Katie, if you maybe want to talk a little bit about what your ultimate career goal looks like.
Sure. Yeah, so I would like to be a PI, so stands for principal investigator. It's kind of just like running my own lab. So being a professor can look really different depending on what kind of institution you're at. So at UC San Diego, most of the professors have a really high research load and sort of less teaching load compared to, say, like at a small liberal arts college or something like that. And there are obviously levels to that. But so, yes, I would like to be a professor and run my own lab someday. And I guess I'll just say that that's like, that day to day would be very, very different than what I'm doing now. So as a professor, you're largely like writing grants so that your team can have money to do the research. You're presenting your team's research all over the place. And teaching a little bit and sort of helping your whole team plan their experiments and analyze their results and et cetera.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
I guess what I'd say is that I personally, and this is something that maybe would freak people out, but I don't have a very specific goal about where I want to end up. But that's partially why I'm doing a PhD, because I actually think that, or what I realize is that doing this PhD has actually opened up a lot of doors to me that I may not have had access to before doing the PhD. Of course, there's a risk that you're overqualified for certain roles, but while it's not at all true that you need a PhD to work in biotech, so many people are getting PhDs these days compared to before that it's just become a lot more competitive if you want to be in some of the like leadership positions at like a startup, for example. So that's kind of what spurred me to get the PhD in the first place. But while I see myself potentially at a startup or venture capital, I'm not exactly sure. And I don't think that's a big issue, because I think that there's a lot of doors that are going to be open when I start thinking about that.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Eric. That was really good input. So let's move on to the next question, unless there are any burning inputs. So I was curious to find out how, for those of you who went or are currently in grad school, how you decided to go to grad school. If you didn't go to grad school, how you decided, against it. And if you left grad school, how you made that decision. So I know there's a lot in there, but I'd love to hear from everyone on that. Nicole, why don't you get us started? Because I think your situation might be something that students are less familiar with, and I think it's a really great story.
Yeah. So, I mean, at least my entry into grad school was a somewhat traditional one. I went through during undergrad, I was a neuroscience and cell biology major, cog-sci minor, and I, at the time, was mostly debating, at first, did I want to go to med school or grad school? But early on, I got involved in research and, got really invested in I want to understand all of the biology of the brain. I want to answer those questions that, those remaining questions we have about it. And so I got, really gung-ho into research. I did do 2 years of research post-bac before going into grad school. And that was mostly, I knew I wanted to go to grad school at that point, but it was mostly to try different kinds of neuroscience, so that when I committed to my, PhD in a specific lab, it was the kind of neuroscience I wanted to do. But yeah, all along that path, I went to grad school because I was, very interested in being a professor and wanted to, pursue that path. That being said, I was always open to, and aware of my other interests. I always had extracurriculars in, teaching and science outreach, and was doing some forms of science writing on the side. So I knew I was interested in other things and was open to the PhD, not leading to a career in academia. But at the time, that was definitely on the table and the main goal. So yeah, these were always conversations kind of going on in my head throughout the PhD. But yeah, it really was, as the years went on, I started to, realize that I didn't want to do research forever. I think I was really, a lot of people will say like you're more excited to like think about and learn about and talk about the science than you are actually doing it sometimes in the day-to-day. And that balance just kind of really started tipping for me over time. And I was getting more and more involved in science writing on the side in different ways. And so when all of a sudden I saw, the opportunity for this fellowship, it was a one-year role to basically, transition into this kind of a career and learn how to do all this work. I, threw my name in the ring and ended up getting this fellowship. And it definitely was a difficult decision at the time because I was still weighing different career options. And still, up until that point, I had worked for a long time to get my PhD, and that had always been a goal. And a PhD would certainly help in many ways in a career in science communications, which we can get into. I think that's one of the later questions. But at the time, it really became ultimately a sort of personal decision. A PhD wasn't necessary for a career in science communications. And with this opportunity, in my lab, it was a great chance to pursue that and see, how I would feel. And ultimately, yeah, it was kind of in the throes of the pandemic when I think everyone was kind of reflecting on their lives and, figuring out what was really most important to them at the time. And this, just kind of became I think I recognized that my priorities had shifted and I had grown up a lot since, the time when I decided to go to grad school, and that's totally normal and okay. And so, yeah, I chose to, I had earned my master's already, and I chose to step aside and try this job, and basically haven't really looked back, and it's been a great choice for me. So yeah, I'm an example of, the normal traditional reasons to get in, but also recognizing that change can happen, and that's also okay.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Nicole.
We can maybe go backwards this time. So I, similarly to Nicole, as an undergrad, I started undergrad pre-med. I knew I liked science, biology, but I pre-med was just like what I thought you did with that as a career. And so I think like sort of the biggest thing maybe to decide whether you want to go to grad school or not is just to get as much research experience as an undergrad as you can. And I know the pandemic has made that probably difficult for a lot of you, and I'm so sorry. But even just, a few months, if you can squeeze it in, like in person in a lab, because I think I didn't really understand what research was until I sort of worked in a lab. It's very different from like the labs that you do as part of your bio classes, at least for me it was. So the sense of like, I just like the sense of, oh, I am the first person in the world to like see this data or do this experiment is just like such a high and still keeps me motivated. And so I think until you kind of get a sense of what research is, it's really hard to make that decision. But yeah, so it was a combination of really appreciating what research was, like, trying to answer questions that the world doesn't know about how biology works and the brain works. And then a combo of that and just like, so we've been kind of referencing it, but I just wanted to say it explicitly. So in a PhD program, you will get paid a stipend and the school covers tuition. So there's like, you are not paid a lot, let me tell you, but you don't have to pay anything. And so comparing that to like, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a medical doctor. And so looking at the price of med school, if I wasn't sure I wanted to do it, was kind of like, ooh, I don't know, that seems insane to me. So that's like another thing to consider. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to follow up on that because I also started my undergrad as a pre-med student. And so UCSD, I'm sure some of you are aware, but UCSD has a program for the BS MS, which is you do a year as an undergrad. So your senior year, you're signing up for courses that count toward research credit for your master's. So you're half doing the master's during undergrad and for another year, so you're one grad year as an actual grad student. So this was, I did get it covered by TAing, so I got a stipend and also had a tuition waived, but at the end of it, it became a lot more difficult as more people got into the program. So I think for me, the decision to go into that was mostly as a non-traditional post-bac and as an opportunity to continue doing research. And I ended up realizing, similar to Katie, that I wasn't really sure about med school, especially as I spent more time doing the research and then transitioned into the biotech industry. It was supposed to be kind of a gap year or a way to make money while doing applications. And it turned into something that I actually liked a lot more. So I think there's a lot broader career opportunities for me staying in the industry, but it's really, I kind of fell into doing a master's and into doing grad school and less of a directed decision. And I still think that it ended up being a really good decision for me and gave me a lot of maturity as a scientist and a lot more experience than if I had come straight out of a bachelor's, which is good just for starting your career or whether or not you want to go and do a PhD after that. So.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kate.
Yeah, I've kind of touched on it before, and I can only speak to my experience. But having taken 5 years to work before starting the PhD, I think in my case was a really good call. I was definitely considering whether I should apply to PhDs out of undergrad, and I was looking at masters and PhDs, and it was kind of like what Katie said about med school. It was like I really wasn't sure. And actually, I had a mentor who, when I told her I was thinking about it, she was like, "You shouldn't do it." And like at that point, I was a little taken aback, but she was like, "See, like if I tell you shouldn't do it and you even like think about it, you probably shouldn't do it." So I do think that waiting until I knew that I enjoyed research and that I wasn't satisfied. I had a very high paying job as a software engineer at a genetics diagnostics company, but I kind of always felt like I always wished I was involved on the science side of things and not just like as a software engineer. So at least having worked, I know like what the alternative is, and I don't think I have that many like visions of alternative universes in my life. You know, like I tried it, I saw that it didn't have everything I wanted, and now I'm doing something else. Whereas I think that maybe, and I think that if you like end up in a great lab and you enjoy research a lot, and like you know from your time in undergrad that you enjoy it, it's fine. But I do feel like some people I know who went straight from undergrad always have, especially when they're not having a good time and they hear about their friends working at Google making 120K. I think it's important to know that it's what you want to do, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that insight, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat, you know, like my decision to go or not go to grad school, it flip-flopped a lot in my undergrad career. For the first 2-3 years of college, I was getting my degree in data science. Data science is in high demand, lots of people are looking for data scientists. So I was totally comfortable with, okay, I'm just going to do this degree and then I can just go work wherever. And then my junior year of college is actually when I got an internship at another biotech company called Illumina. And that is where I got my first exposure to bioinformatics. And I absolutely loved it. But by that point, it was the beginning of my senior year. I had no research experience. And it was a little bit too late for me to get into the application cycle, right, and apply to go directly to grad school. So, but I had I had previous project experience. I had that internship, I was building my portfolio with all of my code in it. So I decided, I will work for a couple of years, right? So I totally agree with Eric. Like if you want to be more involved in science, then I think going to grad school is a great option. But if you are in a career that's heavily focused on technical work, like data science or software engineering, you will be, if money's something you worry about, don't be, you can still learn a lot. I've learned a lot in terms of technical skills just within the past year of working. So it definitely depends on where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself in the future?
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. I think that was really helpful. I just want to remind everyone that if you have a question that pops up, feel free to throw it in the chat and we'll definitely try to get to it at the end. We just have a couple more questions for the panelists now, but definitely throw in any questions that you think of in the chat. So with that, I want to move on to, and this is something that some of you guys have actually touched upon, so I think it's a good transition, but I wanted to ask you how you think your degree has or is going to help you. And then also what are some challenges you think it will present? So I know Eric actually brought that up, talking about, maybe being overqualified versus needing a PhD for certain positions. So if a few of you want to touch on that, that'd be awesome.
Could you explain the overqualified real quick? So you're saying like you wouldn't get jobs because you're getting this advanced degree?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it would be, like, for example, if you have a PhD and then you decide you want to like, just like go do a job that you didn't really need a PhD for necessarily, like you're then competing against like a ton of other people, right? And like often when you have a PhD, companies feel pressure to pay you more. So that's kind of, I think, I don't know if it's a real problem, but I'm pretty sure that if a company was choosing between someone with a PhD with a skill set, with the same skill set as someone who has just like out of undergrad, they would probably rather just pay less and take someone with like slightly less like the years of education, because there's like a weird pay bump that automatically happens with every additional degree that you have. Just like, that's just the way that most of these industries work. I don't think it's like a huge issue, right? I mean, like usually once you get a PhD, you'll probably find there's so many more biotech companies now than there ever were. So I don't think it's really an issue, but something to think about before you embark on a 6-year investment of your life. Like, do you need it? And is it worth it to you to do it?
Awesome. Thank you.
Eric, I don't want to cut you off if you had more to say, but I wanted to add a few things about this. So in my particular situation, working as a research associate, you don't need to have a master's degree to go into this. So you can start right out of undergrad as a bachelor's. And I was offered more money right off the bat when I started my first job because I had the master's degree than some other people who did not, or even what the job description was actually offering. Not everybody posts that, but I had that opportunity to see it. And that was a pretty significant bump that they gave me. So, it really just depends on, in my particular case, I had opportunities to get the degree without a ton of financial investment on my half and without a ton of time. And I think it has paid off for me, but it is really dependent on your individual situation. And as far as, having the right qualifications for positions now, I would say that, at my current company, and I can't speak to every single one, there are opportunities to move up or even move into different areas. So I know people who started off doing bench work in the lab that are now doing management or doing other types of roles, depending on their other skills and experiences. And I think we have at least one director who has a master's instead of a PhD, although I would say definitely having an idea of where you want to target in your career and what you want to do and the level of education most people have, that's going to help you make a better decision about, is it worth it for me to go through the full PhD or to get the master's and then work up to that? or even just to jump in as a bachelor's and keep going. So I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kate.
I can try to summarize a little bit about the role of a PhD in various kinds of science communication or science writing careers, because I know not all of you will want exactly my path, but I will say, so I'll put in the chat actually, let's see, the Job Talk website, which this was a blog that other grad students worked on. It basically interviews people in all different kinds of science related but non-academic careers. And there's a whole section there on science communication. So you guys get a sense of, there's so many different types of science writing jobs that span from, really technical science writing where you can be a grant writer that's helping get the funding for researchers to do their writing. You can be doing medical technical writing. You can do on the total other end of the spectrum, you can be like a science journalist where you're writing really creative public facing stories. There's just so much content that exists now that you can really decide where on that spectrum you wanna be. And then where in that spectrum you might wanna be is gonna reflect how much scientific training you might want or what kind of degree you might want. So, the more you get into communications or a journalism role, which I would say I'm kind of sort of in the middle of this whole spectrum, but it really becomes pretty optional. I would say for my role, having a scientific background, a PhD specifically was not necessary, but there are definitely PhDs in my field. Having the scientific background definitely does help me stand out and help me do my work, because I have the ability to actually understand original research, read those scientific papers, and then be able to do that translation to language that other audiences can understand. And it definitely helps me interviewing and working with faculty that I understand how the research process works. But there are also people coming into my type of role that have more journalism or communications or writing backgrounds, and they have to do the opposite work of actually getting to understand the science, whereas the work that I have to stretch into doing is expanding my writing skills, learning how to not be as scientific in my writing and actually get that kind of human tone into the work, into the writing. But yeah, there are certainly people that do more journalistic type writing, and the more you get into that end of the spectrum, it really is about the craft of writing and what you can produce. So having a portfolio and work that you can say, hey, I've done this, is much more important than a degree that says I've done this, I was trained in this writing or I was trained in this research. The further, more technical you go, you can imagine having scientific degrees can be useful. So if you want to do a grant writing or institutional writing or federal kind of technical writing, masters can definitely be helpful, and increasingly so PhDs are becoming more preferred. And again, it's one of these things where it's not necessarily because that's necessary to be able to do that job, but because more people are getting PhDs and then transitioning into these kinds of science writing and technical writing careers. And so they get to say, we like these guys. So that's definitely something to consider. And again, in general, I think in undergrad, I was never thinking about science writing as a serious career, but I just saying you can be extremely scientifically research minded, but if you've got that bit of a creative itch or just an interest in sharing your passion for science with the public, then try to do some science writing in whatever spare time you have, and see if this is something that you're into, because yeah, it can be taken for granted as a really cool career opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nicole. This actually brings me really nicely to my last question. So my last question is, have you considered other career paths? And if so, what are they? And because Nicole just brought up creativity and that aspect of science, I'd actually love to hear from Eric, who also does science communication, about his input on this question.
Yeah, yeah, as Nicole said, like you really don't need a PhD to do science communications. So I don't tell my relatives this, but I think I actually would like to end up in science communications. But like my dream job would be like I mean, obviously it's like a high goal, but like something like someone like Carl Zimmer, like writing for a major newspaper or making like a podcast that's science based. I don't tell my family that because they don't understand why I would commit to PhD and then want to do that after. But I do think that even in the 2 years that I've been doing grad school, my understanding of biology and just science literacy in general has increased in a way that would not have happened if I had not been doing this. So it's like an investment in like my own knowledge, I guess, like regardless of like what the final salary of a job ends up being, you know? Yeah, and there are a lot of options, but I do want to say that like Carl Zimmer, who I think is probably one of the more famous science writers, does not have a science background. So yeah, it's I think there are ways to blend like a creative side of your brain and a scientific career, but they're not necessarily going to be the most high paying, and you have to just do it because you love it, I think.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. Is there anyone who potentially has thought about other career paths than they're in right now and wants to speak to that?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in. I actually love the panelists that you've chosen because my non-bench science interests revolve around data and art and writing. So for the students who are on the call, I actually started my undergrad as an English literature major and switched into doing biology. So my background is writing, and that's one thing that I really, really enjoy. And another thing that I really, really enjoy is teaching. And so I mentioned earlier that that's actually how I ended up paying for the master's, was accepting TA positions. And I don't want to be a PI. I don't want to stay in academic science and just purely teach. So I'm kind of at a pivotal point where I want to decide, like, do I want to stay in the lab? Do I want to move into, you know, more data focused roles? Do I want to move into more like communication based roles? And how do I do that and also leverage the experience that I've gotten and continue to get? So I would say for anyone who's listening, like for somebody like me, I might want to stay in my current position for a little bit more time and continue to learn. But as somebody as well who's also like jumped from one industry to another and in working and past my graduation, I would say leverage the skills that you have that are not necessarily related to your degree, and maybe use that to decide like how you want to build your dream job. Like, I don't know for sure myself, but you know, Nicole has said a lot too about, you know, oh, I didn't expect to be doing this when I first started. And you can definitely make a more unique position for yourself. So you don't have to just accept, here's this job title and I'm only going to do this. So that would be my experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. All right. Well, thank you so much for all of that insight on my own questions. So now I kind of wanted to take this opportunity to open up to the floor and